Alright, so in the last lesson, we spent some time subclipping out all the takes individually and labeling them according to scene and take in our bin. Your homework was to finish subclipping the rest of the takes. If you haven't done that yet, go ahead and hit pause while you finish it up, since you'll need everything subclipped and ready to go to move forward into this lesson. Okay, so now it's time to organize the footage in our bin a little bit more by adding some descriptive information to our shots. This is what our bin's going to look like after going through this lesson. Now, the fight scene we're cutting is all from scene 10 of the film, so we ended up putting all the clips in the same bin. But since there are a bunch of different setups, distances, angles, and sections of this scene, it's important that we make note of that information. What we're going to do in this lesson is go through the takes in our bin and add a bit of metadata to each clip. We'll be adding 3 pieces of information for each clip. The first piece of info is going to be the type of shot it is. So close-up, medium close-up, long shot, and so on. The second piece of info will be which characters are in the shot. And the third will be a couple comments about the action that occurs in the shot. Alright, so the first thing we're going to want to do is open up the Scene 10 bin. And I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of some of these extra columns, because we're not going to really use all this information when we're looking at our clips to find, what the shot actually contains and who's in it and the length and the action going on. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose to hide all of these extra columns in my bin. All right, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create 3 new columns here. First column I'm going to create is going to be called shot. Second column we're going to call character. And third column we're going to call comments. All right, let's get this into place. All right. Now, the shot column is going to basically contain the description of the actual type of camera shot it is. So the length of the shot, extreme long, medium shot, close-up, extreme close-up, and so on. The character column is going to just describe simply the characters that are featured prominently in the shot. And the comments column is going to basically describe what's going on in the shot. So we're going to just kind of go through this list. I'm going to cherry pick out a few of them, and we're just going to start by describing the shot and the characters. And we'll do that for a few, and then we'll come back and we'll do the comments after that, because I want to talk a little bit more about the comments. There's some important information I kind of want to go over before we get into that. So let's start with scene 10, take 2. And you can see it's shot on the A camera. And it looks like we have a pretty long shot here. I'd say it's probably actually an extreme long. So that's what we'll call it. EX long. All right. And then under characters, you got Dan here and you got Erica. And in the foreground, you got some of the thugs, but they're not featured prominently. They're not really the focal point of the shot. So we're not going to put them in the characters column for this. So we'll just write Dan. And I like to do character space slash space character space slash space. That's just the way I like to do it. You can do it however you want. Just be consistent though, so that it's easy to alphabetize a little bit later on. So I'm going to do Dan space slash Erica. All right, cool. Let's check out these two here. So these are both scene 10 take 3s. So obviously one is from the A camera and one is from the B camera, because this is only a 2-camera shoot. So it looks like this one is probably a long shot. Yep, from the B camera. And this one will probably be from the A camera. That is a similar shot length to the one that we already saw from an A camera. And it is. It's another extreme long. So we'll just copy and paste that part. And this one from the B camera is probably a long shot. So we'll call that a long, also featuring Dan and Erica. Copy and paste. All right, easy enough. Moving on. Let's check out scene 10 AD, take 1. And, I should point out, you don't need to follow along right now. I'm just going to kind of go through some of these examples, and then your homework after this course or this lesson's over is going to be to go through everything in this bin and enter in all of this information on your own before you move on. So for now, just pay attention, and if you want to take some notes. But it's pretty simple, so I'm sure you'll be able to just kind of remember what we're doing here. All right, so scene 10, AD, take 1. All right, so an A camera version and a B camera version, which you can tell by our burn-in, and also, well, the slate's a dual slate, so the only way you can tell right now is by our burn-in. All right, so one of them is a little bit tighter than the other, it looks like. So we're gonna call, we'll call this top one a medium close-up as far as length goes. And then the one from the B camera, we'll call that a medium. All right. Now, let's see who's in the shot. We got TT, we got Dan. Who else do we got? We got Mouth right here. And it looks like we got Rollins too. So we got pretty much everybody except for Erica, because she's been already thrown on the ground, and that's kind of where she hangs out for most of the fight. So you don't have to worry too much about figuring out if she's in part of the mix, because usually it's these 4 guys. So, all right. So what was the orders here? So we'll talk about, we'll list down TT and Dan, and then it was Mouth and Rollins. All right. And this shot will be the same, because it's the same exact, remember, it's the same exact take, just with a different camera. So everything will be identical, but from another angle. So we can copy and paste that. All right. Let's look at a couple more. All right. Now in these two, we got scene 10 AM, take 1, and scene 10 AM, take 2. Shot from only one camera, from the B camera. And they're basically just reaction shots of Erica as she kind of sits on the sideline and reacts to the fight. So we'll call the shot, we'll call the shot a medium close. Medium close up. And the character, the only character, is Erica. And we'll copy and paste that. All right, let's check out some more. All right, let's look at, actually, you know what? Let's look at scene 10K, take 1. One from an A camera, one from a B camera. All right, so here's the A, and here's the B. So we'll start with the A. All right, so this is a little bit wider than the other one. You can see that the B camera version is probably a medium close, whereas the A camera version is a medium. So we'll list them like that. Medium and medium close up. All right. And as far as the characters in the shots, I guess we'll start with Dan, since he's the first one kind of making a move in the shot. So we got Dan, Mouth, and TT for sure. And anybody else? Does Rollins make a appearance? He does not. All right, so Dan, Mouth, and TT. Great. All right, copy and paste. And we'll check out just one more. Well, one more shot. 2 more clips. Scene 10M, take 1 from A and B cameras. All right, here's the A camera. And here's the B camera. Again, it's medium and medium close-up. Medium for A. Medium close-up for B. All right, so now on A, characters involved are Dan, Rollins. He's always got the hoodie, the full hoodie. And then you got TT. So Dan, Rollins, TT. And then just a little bit of, this is just basically follow through action with Rollins again, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But yeah, so characters involved pretty much, yes, Dan, Rollins, and TT. So we'll list it like that. Dan, Rollins, and TT. And copy and paste. All right, so that's pretty much the process there. Now, before we add the comments about the action taking place in the clip, there's a few things I want to point out. More often than not, you'll find that there's a good deal of improvisation going on during a fight scene, or any action scene for that matter. Most of it will be planned out and choreographed pretty meticulously, but inevitably, while filming the actual scene, good ideas will pop up or problems will become obvious, so the choreography will have to be tweaked a little bit. For that reason, certain parts of this fight may sometimes be filmed out of logical order, and so the scene and take numbers and letters won't necessarily guide us straight through the scene in a perfectly straight line. We're going to need to watch through the different takes of the fight and figure out which actions are being covered in each take, where they fit into the progression of the fight, and then mark that down in the comments for each clip. I like to use a bracketing system for commenting on this type of action, just for my own notes. So what I'll do is find the first event that takes place in the take, then the last event, and I'll write down just those two things, separated by a hyphen. You'll find that even though there were some variations from the beat sheet that we created by watching the master shot, most shots will correspond pretty closely to what we expect to see, and will somehow fit into the overall picture. I'm going to walk you through on how to take notes and comment on a few of these takes, and then I'll leave you to finish up the rest on your own. Alright, so let's just start with the first clip, and we'll just we'll add the action bracketing for each of the clips that we've already started labeling with shot and character information. So we'll start with scene 10, take 2. Alright. This one's pretty simple. We're just gonna call this Thugs Approaching Couple. Easy. Thugs approaching couple. And these are all going to have the same description. So we'll just copy and paste that to keep it identical. All right, so that's that. That's easy. Let's move on to scene 10 AD, take 1. All right, here it gets a little bit more complicated. Now we actually have to start kind of paying attention to the beats of the fight so we can kind of categorize and segment what's going on here. Dan throws TT. So on our beat sheet here, you can find right here, Dan throws TT to the ground. So that's what just happened. And then we have Dan attacking Mouth and fighting with Rollins as well. All right, and looks like that's pretty much the end of the take, but they just reset without reslating. So we'll probably see those two or that group of actions again. So we'll probably see him throw TT and then fight with Mouth and Rollins again. All right, so that's what's going on there. All right, so we have the actions that they shock brackets are Dan throws TT to the ground, Dan attacks Mouth, Dan attacks Rollins. So what we're going to write in the comments here, we're going to write Dan throws TT hyphen attacks Mouth and Rollins. And that should give us a really solid description of what's going on there and kind of bracket the action like we talked about. So Dan throws TT hyphen, we'll say Dan again. Dan attacks Mouth / Rollins. And obviously the B camera will contain the same action. So we can copy and paste that. Okay. And let's see. This is simple. Erica reactions. Done. Erica reactions. That's easy. What else we got? Okay, we got some more action. So let's see. This looks like where Dan's going to uppercut Mouth. Yep, so Dan uppercuts Mouth. So where's that on our beat sheet? Right here. Dan uppercuts Mouth. And then TT kicks Dan in the back. Picks Dan up. Dan locks up his arm and throws him to the ground. and then starts fighting with the guys again. So Dan uppercuts mouth, TT kicks Dan in the back onto the ground, TT picks Dan back up. Dan breaks his elbow and throws TT to the ground and then attacks mouth again. That's the action that takes place in this particular shot. So we're going to write this as Dan uppercuts mouth hyphen Dan throws TT to the ground. And the reason I'm not going to include Dan attacks mouth at the end of this is because that's more of just a follow-through motion, just for the sake of keeping the filming thorough and the action continuous in the choreography. But the last main action that's highlighted in this is where he throws TT to the ground. So you can label it differently if you want, but for my purposes, I'm going to say it's Dan uppercuts mouth through Dan throws TT to the ground. Dan uppercuts mouth to Dan throws TT. And I'm not going to write to the ground just because I'm kind of running out of bin space, and I know what Dan throws TT means, so we're just going to leave it like that. These are just notes for you, so if you can have your own shorthand and remember what things mean, then that's perfectly fine. And then the B camera, obviously, same description. Okay, so scene 10M, take 1. All right, so what we got here? Dan's fighting with Rollins. TT grabs Dan. Dan knees TT in the face and then goes back to fighting. Again, this is more of a follow-through motion because it's not even really finished in the shot here. All right, so let's see. It was Dan attacks Rollins. TT grabs Dan from behind. Dan escapes and knees TT in the face, and then Dan. We actually have Dan punch his mouth that was in the master shot. So again, this is just more follow-through action. Really, though, this should be mouth according to their master shot. So this is kind of strange that it would be Rollins. But I doubt we're going to use this piece of footage anyway, so I don't think it's going to mess us up too much. All right, so anyway, Dan attacks Rollins through basically Dan knees TT in the face. So Dan attacks Rollins through Dan knees TT face. Copy paste. And that's pretty much it. You just got to kind of go through that process and do that for all the different shots. And I mean, it really doesn't take too long, especially once you get on a roll. And the more you do it, the more familiar you're going to be with this fight scene. So you're not going to have to reference the beat sheet quite as much, and you're going to kind of be able to hone in on exactly what's going on. And obviously, copy and paste is your friend because that's going to keep things consistent, and it's also going to speed things up for you. So that's pretty much the process. Just give yourself enough information to help you put together the different puzzle pieces in the right order, and it'll make the actual editing process a lot easier. You'll also end up with a better cut since you'll have quicker access to a variety of angles and takes for each part of the fight, which will inevitably help you to choose the best moments to include. Let's take another look at what the finished bin will look like. As you can see, I've got all the shot info, the characters, and the comments entered in. One thing I want to point out is that I tried to keep the wording of similar events and groups of people consistent. For example, I used the copy and paste command a lot. If the shot showed the thugs approaching the couple, I was consistent with how I typed it in. So I wrote thugs approaching couple. The T is capitalized and the words are in exactly that order. If I had written thugs approaching couple on some takes, and then on other takes written walking up to the bad guys, it'd be harder to see in my bin which takes contained the exact same moments, because I'd be calling them different things. Also, it wouldn't allow us to sort our bin by the comments column alphabetically to put all of these similar moments right next to each other. Doing it this way, we again have easier access to the shots that we need, and we can edit more quickly and effectively, which is always our goal. Okay, so there's one last step to this editing preparation process. Now that you have a nicely organized bin, you're going to want to go through the different takes for each section of the fight and just mark down some of your favorites. There's a couple ways that you can do that. You can either color the subclips in your bin to mark them as your favorites, or you can add a new column and label it as a good take. In addition to somehow marking the clip in the bin as a good take, sometimes I also like to place locators or markers on the actual footage to remind myself of exactly where some of my favorite pieces of footage are located. All of this is optional, but it's highly recommended. You can do this as quickly or as thoroughly as you want, but the more carefully you watch each take and mark your favorite stuff, the more likely you're going to be to make sure that you're finding the best material to work with from the shoot. You'll notice as we're cutting the scene together that I'll have some markers and some color coding on the footage that I'm working with to remind me of some of the parts of the footage that I think are worth including in the fight. So in this lesson, we learned some useful bin organization techniques for our fight scene footage. We added 3 custom columns to hold information about the shot, the characters, and the action taking place. We also learned about action bracketing, which allowed us to use the first and the last actions in a take as descriptors in the bin so that we can easily find the part of the fight that we're looking for later on down the road. And last, we talked about marking our favorite takes using clip colors, column information, and markers or locators on the actual footage. At this point, you should go ahead and finish organizing the SC_10 bin with all the different pieces of information that we talked about, and mark up some of your favorite takes. This shouldn't take you too long, and once you're done, you'll have a much easier time in the next few lessons where we begin cutting the fight together. Coming up, we're going to take a look at an overview of the rough editing process. This will be the last study-based lesson in this course, after which everything is going to be hands-on editing. Alright, see you in a bit.